And hi, everybody. I'm Kara. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. It's so nice to be here today, but I'm glad to see everybody using the chat.
All right, I tell you what, why don't we go ahead and get started? We've got a few logistics to take care of in the beginning, so we can, folks come in a little bit late, it won't be that big a deal. Okay, let me advance this slide here. So this is the second webinar in our high school equivalency series of the larger project, Teacher Training Plus. This is a project that's funded by Dollar General Literacy Foundation. And the idea behind it is to provide some targeted webinars. We kind of realized that a lot of times teachers and tutors get a lot of upfront training before they start working with students. And then as they kind of start their work, they don't often get a lot of training and support once they get in the classroom or working with a student. So we surveyed folks to find out what those issues were that were happening actually in the classroom or with a tutor, kind of once you get started working with a student. And based on that feedback we got, we created 4 strands as part of this Teacher Training Plus, one for high school equivalency, one for basic literacy, one for ESL, and one for using published materials. So this is the second one around reading comprehension for that high school equivalency strand. And Carol's got a great webinar for you today. A little bit of kind of logistics and housekeeping before we get started. We're going to ask you to use the chat to introduce yourself, which you've already done. If there are any links or resources that you want to share with the group, you can post those in the chat. Asking questions of the group, do that in the chat. And we will share that chat transcript with you in a follow-up email that you'll receive in about a week after the webinar is over. We're going to ask that if you have questions of Kara, that you use that Q&A feature to ask those questions there. And the reason is that helps us track the questions and make sure everybody's question gets answered. And Kara has agreed to kind of stick around and make sure everybody's questions get answered. So this way we can make sure that happens. We always get this question. We are recording. Like I said, in about a week after the webinar is over, you're going to get a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording. We'll include a copy of the slideshow that you have today. We'll include a little summary sheet with kind of the key points that Kara goes over. This is just a great resource to share with maybe your colleagues that weren't able to attend. A transcript of the chat and the Q&A, and a certificate that you'll get for attending the webinar. Separate from that, we're going to send out an email. Kara's going to send out an email with registration links to the small group coaching sessions. And you'll see those here. These are also links. So when you get that slideshow, links to register for those small group coaching sessions will be in the slideshow as well. Now, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is a small group coaching session? So this was a kind of a feature of this teacher training project. And what we learned is oftentimes, as I said, tutors and teachers don't get a lot of training once they start working with students, or if they do, it's maybe attending a webinar, they go back and they try to apply some of the strategies that they learned in the webinar. Maybe they don't work like they think they should, or other issues come up. And again, there's no kind of way for them to get additional support. So that's why we started these small group coaching sessions. So they happen about 2 to 4 weeks after the webinar. And the idea is you take this webinar, you learn some strategies from Kara, you go back, you start thinking about how you're going to use those strategies with your particular students. And if you have additional questions, you can sign up for one of these coaching sessions. And there's a limit of 10 people. And you sign up. They're at different times of the day, different days of the week. So hopefully you can find one that fits your schedule. And you'll be in that coaching session with up to 10 participants, but typically they're around 3 to 5 folks in there. And it's just kind of a round robin opportunity for you to ask a question about some of the stuff that Kara talked about, how you might use it in your own particular program, or if you've tried to use the strategies and had some problems, you can ask for advice from Kara, from the other people in the group. And I know the ones I've attended, there's a lot of like great discussion, great sharing of resources. Kara, maybe you want to kind of talk about some of those discussions that happened in your small group coaching session from your first webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much, Todd. The coaching sessions are a really wonderful opportunity for us to get to talk one-on-one and in a small group. It's a great place to further the discussion of what you're going to hear today and make sure that any questions that you have, I can help address, anything you'd like to follow up on. In one of my sessions that I had for the first webinar, it was a really great discussion between a brand new instructor and somebody who had been in the adult education field, I believe, for more than 20 years. And it was really wonderful to have both the brand new experience and somebody as an experienced educator, because we could help brainstorm amongst each other. The new instructor had a lot of questions about some of the specifics of writing for the GED test, but then also the more experienced instructor had some questions about how can we encourage students to write an argument and get to that point where they feel comfortable with that. And it was really just a wonderful discussion to be able to help, like I said, both somebody brand new to the field and then somebody who was coming in with a lot of experience, but just needed to help kind of brainstorm and discuss with others. These presentations are always a wonderful opportunity to gain some more knowledge and hopefully some tangible takeaways. But the small group coaching sessions are really designed so that we can follow up on what I'm discussing here today and make sure that any of those questions you have, anything that you'd like to continue discussing, we're able to do so in a much smaller group setting. So yeah, I'm very happy to see you guys today, and we'll take it from there.
Great, great. Thank you, Kara. And we are, like I said, they're on the slide. I think Danielle is going to post links to register. You do have to register for them. She's going to post links in the chat towards the end of the webinar. And then, like I said, Kara will send out an email, follow-up email with links also to register. So keep an eye out for that, that email. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kara and let her introduce herself and go ahead and get started with the webinar. So Kara, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you share yours. Perfect.
All right. Hello, everybody. First, I just wanted to thank Dollar General and Todd, Danielle, Lauren, the whole Pro Literacy team for helping us put these webinars together this year. It's been a really wonderful project to be a part of, and I'm happy to be here with everybody today. So while I'm introducing myself, I wanted you to see my face. Hello, hi. It's also something too that I really want to make sure this is an active, engaging conversation. So I do want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts and make sure that this is an engaging conversation. I know webinars can sometimes feel a little removed from in-person presentations, but I'm a person that I love a lot of feedback. I want that dialogue. I want that conversation. So please, any ways that we can make sure we are all in this together. Okay. So to tell you a little bit about myself, hello, my name is Kara Krawiec. I have my master's in 20th century American Lit. I have 10 years of teaching experience, and then specifically I have been working at Seeds of Literacy, which is an adult education nonprofit in Cleveland, Ohio for the last 6 years. It's something that with a degree in English, I was always asked, oh, so you want to be a teacher? And it was something that I hard pushed against when I was younger. And then as I became a graduate assistant and started teaching, I really realized that my heart was in the classroom. It's something that I found my passion, and then specifically working with non-traditional learners. So after I got my master's, I was teaching as an adjunct at a couple of community colleges and really found that those non-traditional learners were who I wanted to work with, where the need was, and what I was most passionate about doing. So I've been with Seeds of Literacy for the last 6 years. And then in 2018, I launched a book club because as you guys may be able to guess, I love reading, I love writing. So this is something that means a lot to me, this topic in particular, and I want to be able to share that information with you. And then also I have presented local, state, national conferences. As I said, I really, really love having this in-depth conversation. So I want to make sure then that I am able to engage with you all today, answer your questions, help address whatever you may need. So yeah, I'm very pleased to meet you all, and let's get started. So I'm gonna turn off my video, but I promise I'm here. Okay, let's go. Okay. So one thing that I purposely wanted to do with these webinars was to title them all with a similar theme of questions that we hear from our students on an everyday basis. So one question I've heard over and over again when I'm working with students, especially on reading for the HSE exams, is what did I just read? So what I would like to know from you is what are the most common student concerns or complaints about reading, specifically for the HSE exams, that you've heard from your students. So yeah, please go ahead, put that in the chat. I am going to ask you guys to participate a lot. As I mentioned, it's really about that engagement and that dialogue. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, they can't find the main idea. Thanks, Pamela, for getting us started. Not understanding the question or the answer choices. Yes, 100%. Vocabulary, I'm so glad somebody said that. Not being able to read quick enough, drawing inferences. Yeah, here we go. Okay, confused by idioms, ran out of time, not understanding key details, historical context and vocabulary, lack the skills to infer. Yes, forgot what they have read. Excellent. Yeah, all of these things are what our students are concerned about and things that we have noticed as we're working with them that we, as instructors, have to help show them how to gain these skills. Getting lost in the text. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the TABE test. Oh my goodness, yes. So even if we're talking about HSE tests specifically for this webinar, TABE and any of those assessment tools are a totally different ballgame. Yeah, thank you so much. So keeping in mind some of our students' concerns then, I would like to know, what are your concerns then about teaching reading comprehension? So what are your concerns as an instructor? So if this one is maybe a little bit more difficult to answer, let's think about, yeah, okay, translating. There you guys are. I just need to give you a second. I was going to give you an example though, that teaching some of those critical thinking and analysis skills seems like there might not be enough time to practice as much as needed. That's one of my concerns. Difficult levels or different levels of readers, absolutely, in the class and how to address them all. Yeah, transferable skills, teach higher levels. Yeah, apply to their life needs, absolutely. Thank you. So picking appropriate level books for my students. Absolutely, yes, yes. So all excellent questions. So as I mentioned, this webinar, I want to make sure you have some tangible takeaways, but the conversation doesn't end here. So those coaching sessions are designed to give us the opportunity to keep meeting, keep discussing this as we move forward. So as it comes up, Todd mentioned, please put things in the Q&A, but also hang on to those questions and we can come back to them as time unfolds and you're able to try some of these things as well in your classroom. All right. So today, first and foremost, this is my bookshelf. But the first thing I want to discuss today is to acknowledge the disconnect. Several of you had mentioned that one of the largest concerns for our students are the vocabulary and crossing that divide and making sure that they're understanding what they're reading. So what we first and foremost want to do is acknowledge the disconnect that happens when students approach those HSE exams. Sometimes do students feel like it is an insurmountable task. And so we want to acknowledge that these tests often don't align with what we're seeing every single day. And then the way that we can help students bridge over that divide is to help them reconnect with reading. We want to make sure then that we are helping them in a safe, supportive environment that makes reading approachable and relatable. So if you attended my first webinar, you may have noticed I love that word approachable. I love the word relatable. I want to make sure then that moving forward, those are words that we're thinking about all the time. And again, then doing so in a safe and supportive environment. Yeah, find pleasure in reading. Okay, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well, but that is definitely something we want to do. And reconnecting to reading is also finding a way to help our students be compassionate about it, to make it a lifelong love, right? That's what we want to help our students do. But then, of course, the reality of the situation is we have to apply the skills to the HSE tests. So we want to talk about how we can take those skills and then apply them to the context in which we are working in the classroom, which is preparing for that HSE exam. That's all we're going to discuss today. Okay, wall of text. Hello, hello. All right. A little intimidating, right, to kind of check this out. So I'm going to ask you to first and foremost read this. It is a short story, at least a snippet of it, about 420 some words. But as you're reading, I want you to think about what are some of the phrases that indicate when it was written or give you a clue as to when it was written. So I'll ask you to read this. Oh, but as you're reading, I'm going to time you. So make sure as soon as you're done reading, you put your guess in the chat. And also, while I'm timing you, I'm then also going to test you afterwards. So I have a couple of comprehension questions for you to try as well. Okay, so let's take a minute here. Let's read this. So I'll give you some time. And as I said, as soon as you were done reading, put your guess as to when it was written into the chat. And comprehension questions will follow afterwards. So yeah, start timing right now. All right. Quick reader here. Awesome. Let's see. Okay. Oh, and if you do know the answer, that's wonderful. I'm really excited. This is one of my favorite short stories, but don't give it away just yet if you do know the exact answer. Some good guesses. Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so we're under just at the minute mark here. Okay, yeah. All right. Everybody a little bit more time. Yeah, oh, excellent guesses. Oh, got a very specific guess. Yes. Oh, another very specific guess. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yes. Thank you all for these guesses, right? Some of these phrases, I see a lot of like the 1800s, a lot of the early 1900s. That seems to be the most popular guess. Yes. Okay, interesting. All right. So at this time, we're at about the 2-minute mark. So Todd, if you wouldn't mind putting those quiz questions up so that they are available now.
Absolutely. We've got 2 questions and I'm launching them now.
All All right, so take a moment now, answer these two questions for me. Right. Here are the answers coming in. Excellent. Okay. 7% of participants. Yeah, let's keep going. What do you think? What do you think? All right. I want to get to at least half participation. I want to know what you guys are thinking. We're at about 30% right now. So yeah, I'd like to see that participation rate as high as possible. And thank you all for participating and being engaged. I always appreciate it. So close. There we are at 50% participation. I appreciate it. So yeah, I'm going to give everybody just another 10 seconds or so, get in your answers. And then Todd, I will ask you to end the quiz and we can talk about the answers. All right, go ahead and end that poll for me.
All right, ending it now. And let's see,
All right.
results, I think. There we go. We have the correct answers identified.
Yes. Okay. So first, I would like to make sure I reveal when it was written. So this is The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, written 1894. So several of you came very close to that date. Yes. So as we saw, a lot of the language in this short story kind of give away that this is not typical of what we would read in everyday life, right? It's not something that we see in our Facebook posts. It's not something that we see in newspapers any longer. It is very antiquated language. It feels, even the way the sentences are structured, kind of gives away that this was written late 1800s. So thank you. So many of you were correct. And then excellent. We have about 41 of the 70 who answered the poll got the correct answer for number one. Why did Richards hurry to deliver the news to Mrs. Mallard? So he wanted her to avoid, excuse me, hearing the news from someone else. So this is a question that indicates not necessarily a deep comprehension, but a very close reading, right? So you had to be careful of the wording of it, because if you just look at the first sentence, you may think, oh, because she had a heart condition. However, that wasn't the question. It was Josephine who was giving great care to deliver that news. Richards was there so that somebody less careful, less tender of a friend wouldn't be the one bearing the sad news. All right, and then number two, how did we do? All right, this one was a little bit more difficult. So with this question then, it is one that is very common on the GED, where it is like a most correct answer, right? Where all of these kind of indicate how she's feeling. However, what we want to be mindful of is that phrasing of the correct answer, which is the quote, "But now there was a dull stare in her eyes," right? So here, there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. So that line then shows a pivot. That "but now" helps us understand that this is a shift from what was happening before. That first answer, "she wept at once," was her very first reaction to it. So unfortunately, that was the first reaction, not indicating how her feelings were changing, because they changed from that first reaction into that "but now," and kind of the stare as she moves forward and is thinking about what's going to happen with life after her husband's death. Okay, so I want to ask you all, how did you feel while participating in this? What did you struggle with? What did you notice? Yeah, stressed about being timed. Yeah, distractions going on. I was talking, absolutely. Yeah, misread the second question. Yes, the phrasing of it. Would have liked more time to read. Yes, the timing is a huge thing. Yeah, the distractions of other things going on in the room. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that second question, the phrasing of it, purposefully. I wanted to trick you guys. I apologize. So wanted to make sure. Yes. So what do you think our students would struggle with then in looking at this kind of passage, knowing they were being timed? Yeah, not liking the style of writing. Oh, I'm so glad somebody said this. Yeah. So what do you think our students would struggle with when they are given a passage like this? The language, analyzing the passage. Yes. Being overwhelmed by the amount of text. So actually, this excerpt was 442 words. The entire story is actually only 1,011 words. So this is a little less than half. But yeah, would want more time. Oh, understanding the questions. Absolutely. Understanding the implication. Yeah, the historical context. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. All of these things then are things that our students struggle with immediately when they're faced with the HSC texts. Absolutely. Push to read faster, lessening initial comprehension. Absolutely. So these are all the things that we have to help our students address so that they are prepared for this exam. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. So how do we do that? By, as I said, making reading relevant, accessible. I love these words. I want to make sure then that they are approachable, accessible, relevant to our students' lives. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So how do we do that? After we acknowledge the students, and sometimes one of the best things is when I'm working with a student and we're looking at these HSC passages, I tell them this language is antiquated. It is difficult to understand. It is something that is not used in our everyday lives. So what we want to help students do is bridge that gap and connect to reading in a way that is relevant to their everyday lives. So one of the first things we can do is that emphasize reading is an activity that happens every day inside and outside of the classroom. One of the best ways to reinforce that is to ask students to read outside of the classroom. So a couple of years ago, when I started my book club, the first thing I wanted to see was how students were engaging with reading outside of our classroom. I asked them to read 30 minutes a day. It was a challenge. I gave them all little sheets to track their progress, but I was encouraging them to just read for 30 minutes a day for the entire month. And what I wanted to make sure I was stressing was that it was a fun activity. We incentivized it a little bit at different benchmarks. We were able to give students little prizes, and actually after every 4 hours of reading, we gave students a leaf that they were able then to place onto our larger reading tree. Because we wanted to see then how many leaves we were able to collect throughout the month. So we want to make sure then that we are showing students how to have a lifelong love of reading. And one way to do that is just to challenge them to start in their everyday lives. One of the things though that we might want to address is that if students come to us and say, I don't like to read, I don't read, I am only reading because it's required for the test. We want to meet students where they're at and help encourage them and find things that they can start to read that they may enjoy reading. Ask students what movies, what TV shows they like, what are their hobbies. One of the things we can do is really help students find materials to read that they can connect with. That can be very difficult, but showing them how to access things online, finding out then how they can connect perhaps a movie to then the original book that it was based on, doing some activities together that really allow us to make those connections between what's already happening in their everyday lives and then the reading that can happen as well alongside it. And also if they're struggling with something like 30 minutes a day, have them start at 10. Yeah, Thank you, Laura, adding reading to their children and their children's interests so that they can share with them. Actually, when we were trying this challenge a couple of years ago, one of my coworkers created a poster that talked about how reading helps children learn in the school setting, and then was like, and this is why you should read too. And it was a great way to connect and bridge those two lives. So yeah, any way that we can get students reading outside of the classroom. And it also doesn't matter what they read. Read anything, read everything, read whatever comes your way. I tell students, you're even reading every day without realizing it. Facebook posts, the way we interact on social media, text messages, posters, ads that we see on the road, right? And then shopping. Our whole lives are surrounded by reading, and making a conscious effort to make that a part of your daily life can help build these skills. The next thing, of course, we want to address is finding those materials that are relevant and accessible to students. One of the best ways that we can help our students find things that they may enjoy reading is to ask them. So when I was starting my book club, one of the first things I wanted to do was to survey students. I wanted to figure out then what they were interested in, what kinds of stories they would gravitate to. And as we've mentioned, again, language can be a really big barrier. So you want to make sure that you're describing things in ways that will relate to your students. Like here I had the option of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. And I just wanted to get a sense of what people were interested in, but I compared it to the Hunger Games. So finding out from your students what they are interested in can help guide you. Yeah, and thank you, Susan, for putting that in the chat. Absolutely. And there are tons of resources online that you can use as well to help you just figure out what are the best materials to use with your students. And I know, especially in an HSE classroom, you are sometimes beholden to particular materials. However, using these supplemental materials, and again, encouraging students to do so outside of a classroom, can really then help just get comfortable with reading as an active activity that happens every day. As I mentioned then, starting a book club is a great way to allow students the security and the safety and the excitement of how to, I'm sorry, I had my eyes on the chat, but allowing students the safety and security to develop the skills they need while reading things that are interesting to them in a group scenario. And it's a little social and it's fun. This can happen inside and outside of the classroom. You can do small group book clubs. You could separate students depending on their reading levels into different book choices so that they can fit their needs the best. But also what I found with my book club is having students who are reading at a variety of levels, they start to really come together and encourage each other. One of the most beautiful things that I found with my book club was that as we got into Becoming, we chose to read Michelle Obama's Becoming, was that some of my students who felt more comfortable with that level of reading and text were able to then help those students who were struggling. And it was really a great way to develop not only the skills that they needed, but then a close friendship amongst each other where it's a supportive environment to really help connect with what interests them. All right. And then another way we can help our students is to engage in the larger community. So making sure that they are aware of things that are happening, again, outside of the context of the classroom. So for instance, I just put up a picture of some of our students who a few years ago were asked by the Singers Club of Cleveland to help them celebrate their 125th anniversary. They were asked to read poetry by Lewis Carroll as the singers sang songs kind of with this theme of Through the Looking Glass. It's a really neat experience to be a part of, but also there are so many things going on in the larger community that we can help get our students engaged with. For instance, currently right now, the mayor of Cleveland started an initiative called Cleveland Reads, where he's asking the city of Cleveland to read 1 million books this year as a collective group. So we're asking our students to be a part of that and encouraging them to help for a much larger context than just what's happening in the confines of a classroom. And then also, of course, there are other book clubs and things and events that happen outside of our classroom that we want to engage students with. I love this example of, we were invited to participate in a local group called Ignite Ladies Book Club, and some of my students were able to attend, and they got so invested that they've gone every single month since. Really helpful to, again, make sure it is outside of the classroom as well as then within the constructs of the class. All right. And then, of course, once students really start to connect with what they're reading and they start to feel more comfortable, we want to get them to start digging deeper into what they're reading. Because again, it doesn't matter what you read, but if you're interested in it, if you're connected to it, if you're relating to it, it's going to be that much more of a learning experience. So I have a wonderful quote from someone named Gerald Graff. He wrote an article called Hidden Intellectualism, where he talks about how street smarts and academic smarts are not opposed to each other, are not completely separate worlds, but instead can be used to work in tandem with one another. So he argues that making a student's non-academic interests an object of academic study is useful then for getting students' attention and overcoming their boredom and alienation. But this tactic won't in itself necessarily move them closer to an academically rigorous treatment of those interests. On the other hand, inviting students to read and write about cars, sports, or clothing fashions does not have to be a cop-out, as long as students are required to see these interests through academic eyes. That is, to read, think, and write about cars, sports, and fashions in a reflective and analytical way, one that sees them as microcosms of what is going on in the wider culture. So what we want to ask students to do is to be able to see these texts through academic eyes. So of course, then we have to start helping them build the skills and set the foundation. So as an instructor then, your role is to help guide students through this process of reading through these academic eyes. So seeing that, we can connect to reading and make it a supportive, engaging activity. The first thing that we need to do then is remind students, reading, active, right? It's just like exercise. We have to practice, we have to put it into something that gets our whole self present and involved. There are several active reading strategies out there that are wonderful, that are so helpful. I tend to focus on these 6. So visualize, clarify, question, predict, connect, and evaluate. So I put on there just a screenshot of a handout that I use with my students, and I'd be happy to provide it for you all after the webinar. But it's just something to make sure that we remind students how to actively engage with the text. And then, of course, if we are going to tell them that it is an active activity, we need to be able to model how to engage and interact with the text. One of the most important things that I try to make sure I do is to sit down and model my reading process with students to show them how I interact with the text and move through one together with them. And also then do a talk aloud, where as you're moving through your process, you're telling students why you're doing what you're doing, explaining the process for how you think through what you're reading. Also, we want to help students make sure that they know how to interact with the text. How many of us have had students where we tell them, okay, I'd like you to highlight the most important part of this paragraph. And then unfortunately, you see they've highlighted every single sentence. We want to make sure we are showing students how to properly engage and interact with those texts. One thing I stress to students is chunking. So rather than trying to see that whole wall of text and get kind of swallowed up in it, break it up into pieces. Look at it in manageable chunks. Stop, reflect, clarify, question, especially questioning. One of the best things we can do as readers is just to question your own understanding, question what's happening in the text. That word why is so important, or excuse me, that question why, so important, because we want to make sure then that we're stressing a deeper understanding of the text. And then of course, annotating. So what we can do then is make sure that we show students how can you annotate a text. And we want to make sure that it's in our students' own words, but that we're giving them the structure they need to move through this process, just with a little bit of guidance, but on their own. So annotating needs to be in their own words, in their own understanding of the text. All right, and then we can help students with fluency and vocabulary. As you all have pointed out several times, that issue of being timed, of not having enough time, of feeling the pressure of it, of not being comfortable then with the language that's used, all of that becomes a huge hindrance when we're looking at those HSC texts. So what we want to do is help our students improve their fluency. There are tons of resources online that can help with practice with timed tests. There's a website that's coming to mind just right now, ReadWorks. If you're not familiar with that, it's a wonderful website that allows students to focus just on the fluency of their reading and under a variety of different topics and texts. There's social studies materials, science materials, all different contexts that we want to be able our students to feel comfortable with. And then, of course, vocabulary. Vocabulary is a huge, huge disconnect for our students. So we want to help them break down words. It's important for students to know prefixes, suffixes, how they can break them down to more readily understandable pieces. And of course, then we want to stress the difference between denotation and connotation. So this is something that for a lot of our students, they'll say, okay, I can look it up in a dictionary. I can find what this word means. But then thinking about it when it's used in a different context, or when the word has a couple of different meanings, we want students to understand that there's also a connotation to every word, how it makes you feel. So all of these things then help us just allow our students to understand that words mean different things and words have multiple meanings. It's actually something we'll get to, but the GED tries to stress that. So yeah, not just about the dictionary definition, but also what it means, how it makes you feel, because that can really help understand then how it's used in different ways. Of course, then helping our students understand that they can get the main idea of a word and use get the main idea of a sentence and use the context clues around it to understand what the word means. And also then, of course, part of that fluency is getting students comfortable with the idea of, yes, I can read a sentence and I don't need every single word on the page to get the bigger idea. So if a vocabulary word is really tripping them up, we want to give them the tools so that they can see the larger picture. They can still see around it without getting lost within just one word. Also, there's so many ways to make it fun. So a way you can incentivize this with students is have an activity in class where you have a Scrabble competition, words with friends. Wordle has become huge. Taking a couple of minutes at the beginning of class to do an activity like that together. Also, I was just, for instance, at a basketball game the other night with a friend, and he pulled up on his phone a game called Contexto. I had never even heard of that before. So what you can do is just help our students see this as a fun activity. All right. And then what we need to make sure we do is explain the difference between memory and comprehension. So my question at the very beginning of this presentation, in the title of my presentation, what did I just read? That is a memory question. What do I remember? However, what we want to push students to think about is, what do I think about what I just read? Asking them what their opinion is about what they're reading. Having them focus on drawing conclusions and making predictions. Inferences are a huge part of the HSC exams. That's a skill that they stress again and again, almost above all else. So we want to make sure we are helping support our students do that by encouraging them to make their own arguments. What I love to tell my students in book club is you can argue whatever you want. We are currently reading some poetry by Amanda Gorman, and I tell them you can interpret it however you'd like as long as you find the support in the text. So again, encouraging our students to think beyond just what is this about? What is a good summary of this? And moving towards those deeper questions. I also love to ask students, why did the author write this? Why did the author focus on this topic? Getting them to think about that process as well as a writer can also help them that deeper understanding. Right. And then, of course, as we've been stressing this entire time, comprehension in everyday life. So this is something that as we go through our everyday lives, we need to be able to think critically, to analyze, to infer what is going on in the world around us in text and interactions. There's something that deep comprehension is everywhere. All right. So then we reach this point where students are feeling more engaged. You're starting to see the difference in their skills. They're feeling more comfortable. How do we transition to those academic texts? It's important that we layer it in, that we gradiate those texts. So for instance, if a student who at the beginning of your class had told you, I don't like to read, it's not something I do, and you ask them, what are you interested in? And they say, oh, Vampire Diaries, I watch that all the time. You could say, oh yeah, let's read some Twilight together. And then if you notice they're interested in that, we'd slowly try to move them towards something like Edgar Allan Poe. So showing that progression and using transitional texts. Like for instance, I pointed out Shirley Jackson's The Lottery earlier. That's a great one. That's a high interest, but also then high readability text, but has a lot of deep symbolism and things that you can dig into within it. So showing them that you can take these different topics and move them towards a more academic understanding. Have students select newspaper articles on different academic topics. If a student is really interested in recycling because their neighborhood has just started offering that, you might then want to encourage them to find some scientific articles on the importance of recycling. Any way that we can help bridge those everyday readings and what's going on outside of the classroom within what's going on inside the classroom. And then, of course, explaining the context. So as several of you had mentioned, the historical context can become so difficult for students. We have to help support that by explaining what's going on around what they're reading. For instance, The Story of an Hour is one that I love using with students because the general understanding of the story is her husband passes away. She's so sad. But then she has a realization that, oh, I get to live for myself now. And as a woman in 1894, that was not something that happened. So talking about public versus private sphere, kind of how that worldview influenced Kay Chopin's writing can really help students understand what's going on. Yes, and then of course, unfortunately, there is going to be the antiquated subject-specific language. We do want to help students navigate that, but encouraging them that they're already reading with academic eyes. This can be so helpful to just make sure they know I'm already achieving this, I'm already doing this. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about the HSE passages and what students are seeing. So for the GED exam, the language arts section of the test is 150 minutes. It's actually 3 parts. So it's reading comprehension, it's an editing and grammar portion, and then an extended response. The extended response is 45 minutes, and thankfully they get a 10-minute break in between sections 1 and 2 and 3, or excuse me, between 2 and 3. But what this shows us then is that over 100 minutes of the test are still that reading comprehension. So the vast majority of the test is focused on that. And what we want to make sure then is that students feel comfortable navigating not only the timing of it, but also then the types of passages that are being used. So with a lot of these exams and a lot of standardized tests, they use all public domain writing, which means then of course the copyright laws don't apply. Often they're over 100 years old. That's why a lot of the literary works feel so antiquated. Thankfully with nonfiction, we get a little bit more flexibility there. However, again, when you think about the context, it can be overwhelming for students. because actually 75% of the GED reading passages are nonfiction and only 25 fiction. 25% fiction. However, you still have to have a large amount of background knowledge in the social studies and science topics to feel comfortable with them. And actually what I found very interesting is that here GED even specifies that one thing that students need to feel comfortable with for the language arts part of the test is the Great American Conversation documents. So anything that falls under that scope of Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, all of these things, students have to feel comfortable with, even for the language arts test. So again, kind of showing them how all of these skills apply across disciplines. The length of the passages are between 400 and 900 words. So as we were kind of discussing earlier with the story of an hour, that snippet I gave you was only 440 some words. However, we still felt like there wasn't enough time, right? There wasn't enough time to read it. So we want to make sure that students have the strategy and the endurance to get through 400 to 900 word passages. And then a large component of the GED test, which they stress, is to determine the details of what is explicitly stated and make logical inferences on valid claims based on textual evidence. So again, it's this idea of not just what is explicitly stated, but then also what we can infer based on what we read. GED stresses very much so that vocabulary that's used has more than one meaning in different contexts. And so we want students to be able to navigate how to use that and to make those logical inferences based on what they're reading. And I'm sorry, everybody, I am working through this. I haven't paused for a lot of questions, but I hope you're putting them into the Q&A. I just am trying to be mindful of the time, but I will stick around afterwards to hopefully answer any questions. And I see you all are actively participating in the chat and giving some resources, so I appreciate that so much. For the HSC reading passages, an important thing to note, so the HiSet separates reading and writing. So they are not together, separate sections of the test. So with the reading, it is approximately 65 minutes with 50 multiple choice questions. So it's very differently structured than the GED test, which approximately has about 8 passages or so with 6 to 8 questions each. But here, the HiSet has 50 questions in total and doesn't quite do a breakdown of how many questions per passage. However, looking at it and studying some of the examples and the sample questions, looks like approximately 5 to 7. But it's interesting what they stress, because they do 40% literary text and 60% informational text. However, the literary texts include poetry. It is a component that the GED no longer includes. So with the HiSet then, we want to make sure students feel comfortable with those fiction texts and with poetry. It's also very interesting too, because when we look at what they stress, they talk about inference and interpretation as that second, right under comprehension, as the skills that are needed. So again, inference, being able to come up with an argument based on what you've read, to dig deep into it, is so important. And here in comparison, HiSet passages are between 400 and 600 words, so they are significantly shorter than the GED passages. All of this is to just kind of help show what students are facing when they take these exams. And one of the things too that I would like to point out about HiSet is that they stress the English discipline terms. So for instance, they place a heavy emphasis on knowing what literary devices are, understanding plot elements. They may have a question that just says, what is an example of third person omniscient? And they'll give options from the passage that may be different viewpoints. So students have to have that vocabulary specific understanding for the HSE. So we want to make sure then we're preparing students with how to approach all of this. So of course, then there are a couple of things that once we're helping students work at this HSE level and with these texts, we can help them do. Get comfortable with timed reading, as we've stressed. This is something that we want to make sure that students are practicing with from the moment they start reading, the second they're ready to take that test. It's difficult to have a clock on you. And as we know, and we all just experienced, when you feel like you're running out of time, your performance is hurt. So we want to get students comfortable, even if it's as simple as, you know, putting a timer on their phone or having kind of a group practice of a timed reading together. And then there's this debate of whether or not to read the questions first. I'm really curious to see, so if you don't mind throwing in the chat, what do you advise your students, but then also what do you practice as an instructor? So do you read the questions first, or do you read the entire passage first before answering the questions? Yeah, go ahead, throw that in the chat. I'm really curious. This is an interesting debate. Yeah. Tell learners read the question first, read questions first, read questions first. Questions first. Yeah. Questions first. Yeah, read the passage, then the questions. I advise my students test both. Yeah. Read questions first. Questions first. Interesting. I like this. Yeah, this is such an interesting debate because everybody's process is a little bit different. So I appreciate that Jessica put in there to test. She advises students to test both because that is something that it's interesting. Studies have been done to show just how short-term memory affects our ability to retain information. And one of the things that they often talk about is being able to retain how much information. So with a shorter text, maybe something like 400 words, it may be advisable to have students read the questions first. However, in a text as long as 900 words, to gain a full understanding of it and not try to be focusing just on what they just read in the questions, it may be better for them to read the passage first. But again, having students test which strategy works best for them, that is really the key, is to let students see what works best for them in a testing environment. So asking students to make inferences beyond the questions. So having students do an exercise where they get into a group and they come up with the questions to ask other students can be a really helpful way to put into practice the strategy of coming up with questions that dig deeper into it. But then also letting students test out those different strategies in different testing environments. So for instance, somebody mentioned TABE earlier. So a good idea may be to have students try that, read the questions first, and then go back to the passage and see what happens. But allow them also to talk about what works, what didn't. Yeah, and thank you, Patty. There's a huge difference between test taking and reading for pleasure, and encouraging students to kind of understand that difference. Because yeah, especially when you're under that time restraint, you don't need to fall in love with what you're reading, but you need to deeply understand it to answer questions, but only temporarily. All right, so what I would like to know is, what additional test taking strategies do you recommend for students then as they're practicing with these skills for the HSE exam? Yeah, is there anything else that you would recommend that really helps students with that test taking component of it, understanding that difference? Yeah, between reading for pleasure and reading for information. Yeah, eliminate obvious incorrect answers. Yeah, context clues. Yeah, definitely. Read all answer choices before choosing. Yes, yes. Yeah, reading the question fully, right? Understanding what the question is asking first. Yeah, personal prep. Absolutely. Sleep the night before. So important. Yes, yes, yes. All things, because sometimes it's just a bad test day, right? Yeah. Oh, well, thank you guys so much. What I'd like to do now is just give us some time for some questions. I want to check in, and then we'll go to the Q&A as well.
Sure. And Kara, I'd just like to point out, I know we're at the bottom of the hour, so if folks need to go, thank you for attending. We recognize that some people have like a lot of things on their calendar. We certainly do. But for those of you who want to stick around and ask questions of Kara, we're willing to stick around for a few additional minutes. Make sure you get your answers in and or your questions in, and Kara will make sure that everything gets answered. And Kara, we do have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
The first one is, what is the ratio of reading comprehension, reading speed, and vocabulary? For example, when answering a question on the GED, how do students approach these questions?
Okay. So real quickly for myself, so I want to make sure I understand the question as we've talked about. So what is the ratio of reading comprehension, reading speed, and vocabulary?
Yeah, I think maybe in terms of importance of like focusing on being able to read quickly, being able to understand the vocabulary, and developing those comprehension skills, leading to a better score would be how I would interpret that. Like, how much time, kind of instructional time, do you spend on each of those?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that, especially when you're using in-class instruction time, the real bulk of the focus should be that reading comprehension. Reading speed and vocabulary are something that students can kind of work on independently outside of class, but also can be reinforced as you're working through that reading comprehension. So the ratio for that, if I was going to kind of put some numbers on it, like I would say at least, you know, a 60, 20, 20 kind of thing, where really you want to make sure that the reading comprehension is at the core of it, because we can practice using that vocabulary kind of in the context of understanding what we're reading. And the time is something that, again, if you can reinforce getting students comfortable with a timed reading exercise as early on in the process as possible, that's something that we can kind of navigate when you're approaching it. I have worked with students where as soon as they come into class, they might do a little independent study and immediately ask me, okay, put a timer on. Because it is about that balance of finding how much can I learn or understand within a timed restraint. But again, kind of at the crux of it, that reading comprehension needs to be the core.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, especially, I mean, obviously, I think doing some fluency activities can help as well, but a lot of times that reading speed is going to improve as people improve their comprehension and their understanding of vocabulary.
Absolutely.
So it kind of improves with practice, and as you were talking about, kind of practice under a timed environment. As people get more comfortable with that, they're going to feel more at ease and be able to improve their reading speed as well. Would be
absolutely
kind of my thoughts about that.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, also specifically for the GED test, so many of those questions, as we may know, are tricky, are designed to really, I don't want to say mislead students, but when it's asking for what is most correct, or kind of giving options where several could be understandably the correct answer, we really want to stress to students then, if you have to take a little bit extra time with the reading, it's better to do that to deeply understand, because then, of course, as we've talked about different test taking strategies, later on, if you're starting to run out of time, you can hopefully eliminate obvious questions that are incorrect. You can look for ways, then there's even some where you're running out of time. You know, it's better to try to at least answer a question, things like that. But as far as focusing on understanding what the GED passage is saying, that's really at the core of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Another question, how do you help students who get stuck on vocabulary and end up using all of their time?
So one thing I would say, especially when vocabulary is the biggest struggle for students, stressing the importance of being able to see the sentence as a whole, being able to understand the context of what's happening in the sentence. What is the main idea of it? It's very tempting to get stuck on like one word, especially if it's problematic or you're not sure how to even approach it. But if you're able to understand what's going on in the larger context of the sentence, paragraph, passage, all of that is more important. So really just reminding students, again, that idea of denotation versus connotation too. Like if you can get a general feel for what the word means, it might help versus focusing so much on what is the definition. I hope that helped answer that.
Actually, Kara, I have a kind of a follow-up question with that.
Yeah.
I've seen activities before where it's almost like a closed activity, but rather than trying to choose a word to fill in a blank within a sentence or a larger paragraph, it's really just kind of taking some of the words out and asking people to read it and get meaning from it without those words even in there, by kind of working on making a prediction about what kind of type of word might be there, what the, and kind of working on the overall connotation of the sentence or the larger paragraph is. Do you think activities like that are helpful, at least in building a student's confidence in their ability to be able to not focus so much on, I don't know what this word means, and kind of use some of those general strategies? Are those effective or
Oh, absolutely.
not?
Yeah, because I would say it reinforces not only that you can kind of understand a sentence as a whole without each and every individual word, but it also then is empowering the student to say, this is how I feel I would write this, or what I would like use as the word, and to show then, if once the student kind of picks a word to put into the blank, then you could show them, what the actual word might have been, etc. But showing them how they're alike, or how there's slight nuances between what they may have picked versus what was actually there. I think that's a great idea for stressing those two very important things. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. We don't have any more questions. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to give people a couple of more minutes to type some questions in. Since we did go long, I want to make sure if people
Yeah, I apologize. I was going a little long there.
No, it's okay. I think it was a lot of really good information. That's what I'm seeing in the chat as well. And just while we're giving folks a couple of minutes to type in any additional questions they might have, I want to call attention to the chat and the fact that Danielle has posted links for the coaching sessions. So if you're interested in signing up for those, you can go ahead and check those out for the links in the chat. You do see on Kara's slide here the next track or the next webinar in her track coming up on April 11th, and she's also posted another one that she's doing with Anne-Marie from that's doing the basic literacy track. They're doing a webinar on using published materials in a multi-level group or class. And again, those are kind of materials agnostic. So what they focus on are kind of common characteristics that instructional materials, published materials have, and how you can take advantage of those structures or types of activities to be able to work in a multi-level group or class. And then you see on the right-hand side of the slide, other tracks. Pick Your Battles are upcoming in, I think, next week. January 17th is next week. Is on for ESL students, best practices with helping students with pronunciation. And then Anne-Marie's, again, directed towards basic literacy students, is effective strategies for teaching writing to basic literacy adult learners. And I think there's also a published materials one on January 30th or 31st around using published materials, so print materials, in a virtual setting and some strategies for using that. I know that's one of the things that we kind of struggled with during the pandemic. And I think I've effectively given enough time for people to get a couple of questions in. So we have one from Christine. Let's see, if you have a webinar already on the 17th, can you sign up and take the your battles, the pronunciation one at a later date? So it's only offered once, Christine. So all of these are only offered once, but if you sign up for it, you'll be guaranteed to get a link to the recording, even if you don't actually attend. So I'd say if you have a conflict for any of these, make sure you sign up and register for them, and then you'll get the link to the recording. And then we have another one. How is a love of reading developed for students who have learning disabilities, such as dyslexia?
So I can share from my experience working with my learners, especially in my book club. I have found that students, especially when they feel the support from their peers and the support from their instructor, it can help them really understand then the world that's opening up as they become more comfortable with reading. I have several students who are some of our beginning readers and working probably below a 3rd grade reading level, or who may have deep learning disabilities or may struggle with dyslexia. And one of the things that I see again and again is the more they discover what they're learning as they're beginning to read more, the deeper that love grows. I have a student, for instance, who for the first time learned the word recipe and learned what that meant. And as she was able to identify it and see it, out in the world, she said, "Oh, I've been cooking my entire life. I love cooking. And I didn't know that it was called a recipe when you write it down or when you share it." So it's sometimes like really celebrating those kinds of moments and embracing it and making sure that, again, like I said, that safe and supportive environment as an instructor, being as passionate as our students are for what they're doing, or sometimes even I will be more passionate about. So trying to encourage that kind of enthusiasm. But really, I think seeing the growth, having students check their progress. Something also that Seeds of Literacy does is, as students move through our program, we do fluency assessments at different points to kind of check progress. So we'd be able then to show them, look at the changes you're making, any way that we can help students see how they have grown since beginning in the program or beginning the class. That's what we want to emphasize. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think seeing progress, seeing tangible evidence of progress is always motivating. I was going to say, and I think this is really true for any student, learning disabilities, dealing with learning disabilities or not, is that students, enjoy reading when it's easier for them. So that's one of the reasons why we work on expanding a student's vocabulary or working on reading fluency. Those sorts of skills is because as students become more fluent readers and they know more words, it becomes easier for them to read. They're not struggling word by word, a sentence by sentence, and it becomes a more pleasurable thing to do, activity, and so they then do it more because they enjoy it. So I think the other thing I would add to that is focus on teaching, especially a student with learning disabilities, dyslexia, or whatever it is, some strategies that work on making that reading more enjoyable. So, Kara, you talked about chunking as a reading comprehension strategy to begin with. So dividing the text up into smaller chunks. That's especially good for any student with learning disabilities. I think kind of teaching them that they don't have to go through kind of piece by, the whole text, but really they can take kind of piece by piece and take their time and read and reflect and make sure they understand, go back and rereading if they have questions. Some of those just kind of basic approaches to reading that's going to make it more enjoyable for them, make it more doable for them, digestible for them, and where they're going to experience more success. And I think those lead to it being just generally a more pleasurable experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I so agree with that, Todd. Yeah, thank you.
And then we have another one. Do you think a test taking class would be a first step for English language students wanting to take the GED, or would you have them go straight into the content classes?
Oh, I really appreciate that question. That's an excellent question. Yeah. I think honestly, any test taking skills that we can give our students are so helpful. But having a test taking course before content may be a little bit difficult, just because so much of the skills and the test taking strategies we want to be able to immediately put into place into practice. So doing that before learning some of the content may be difficult. It'd be really interesting to see those two things kind of happening in tandem. Like if there was a class set up just for some test taking tips and kind of tricks, and then also the content material, or even within a class, your own class, you could structure it so that some of the content is taught, and then really there could be, several days out of the class that are structured just around developing those skills. It's interesting because some community colleges, some universities require those kind of study tips or study skills classes first before students get into content material. I've actually taught a couple of them that really focus on, okay, how do I work as a learner? It'd be interesting to kind of see in this context, applying some test taking classes or skills ahead of time, how that would kind of change students' progress. I love that question. I don't know exactly how to answer it, but I think they kind of have to happen in tandem. But I love the idea of like a separate class, potentially, that can help reinforce some of the content, but serve also independently, how that would work. I love that. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would kind of come down on the idea of, introducing those test taking skills kind of in tandem with the content, but then really focusing on them, once the students have gotten comfortable with the content, because really, kind of the purpose behind the test taking skills is to, kind of teach the student, get the student comfortable with that test taking environment. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hard for them to, and you want to kind of replicate that test taking environment as accurately and realistically as possible for them to understand how those test taking strategies work. And it's going to be difficult to do that if they're not comfortable with the content first, would be kind of my thinking about. So it's going to be difficult for them to say, go through and answer the questions that they feel comfortable with first, and then, kind of use their remaining 5 minutes or 10 minutes to guess the questions that they left out. Well, that's a hard strategy to apply if you're not first comfortable with the content, so you can identify which questions you know the answer to and which ones you don't.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I kind of agree that like a way to kind of make it happen in tandem. I really love that idea, but
yeah,
kind of having a separate like class for it can be so beneficial to like, anyway.
Yeah, and maybe you can kind of stagger that so that you get into the content to begin with, and then you have that separate class that maybe starts, halfway in when you're at a point where the students are kind of comfortable with the structure. Yeah. And then, like you said, that can either be integrated into the content class or kind of go in tandem with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that. That was a great question.
And then our last one is the webinar for teaching dyslexic dyslexic students listed today. We don't have a webinar scheduled for teaching dyslexic students. So that was just kind of a question that popped up in the context of this one. I don't believe, Danielle, do we? I don't think
No, I
that's.
don't think so. Sorry, I had to find my mute button. It was
No
underneath
problem.
all the other tabs. No, I don't think we do.
Okay, so I think that was just an issue that came up in the questions. Okay, so I think that's all of our questions. Kara, again, thank you very much for a great presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us. And let me encourage you again to take advantage of all of the webinars in our Teacher Training Plus series. Thank you all and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for attending. I just want to say that again. I just really appreciate all of your time and attendance. So, thank
All
you.
right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.